Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 17th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then Jesus said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
How many of you all have ever been to a Chick-fil-A? Okay, kind of more than I thought. There's not a whole lot close to here, so I figured not a whole lot of you. But for those who are unfamiliar with the beauty of Chick-fil-A, let me just describe it a little bit. It's a fast food place that serves chicken, if you couldn't tell. It's known for a lot of things, but maybe one of the most notable things it is closed on Sundays. They've really grown and expanded in recent years with primarily how their drive-thru operates. I've seen some locations that have like 3 or 4 lanes wide of a drive-thru. And rather than having to shout your order into a microphone and try to figure out what they're saying back to you through the speaker, they have people that come to your car and take your order. But it's usually like 20 feet before you get to the menu, so you have to have the menu memorized, and if you ask what's on the menu, they hand you a piece of paper, and you're like, "There's a giant menu right there. Can I go?" Okay, that was a rabbit hole. But then when you pull up at some places, and some of the newer restaurants, when you pull up to get your food, instead of reaching through a window, there's a door, and they come out to you. It's amazing, these things that they can do. Actually, not long ago, I saw this idea where they would have a new location that would just be a drive-thru. That's nothing that exciting, except the whole kitchen would be a second level when you drive under the building. Imagine. It could be interesting. Okay, so you get the impression there's something special about this place, but there are a number of things that make it unique, but there's this one other little detail that makes it pretty distinct. Anytime you interact with an employee there, anytime you look at them and you say, "Thank you," do you know what their response is? "My pleasure." They say, "My pleasure." Not "you're welcome" or "sure thing" or "no problem." "My pleasure." "Thank you. It's my pleasure." There have been a lot of times that I've wanted to look them in the eye and say, "Is it really? Are you sure about that? This was your pleasure?" But most of them really do seem to enjoy what they're doing, and they seem genuinely friendly. But it's a little obvious they've been trained to give that kind of response. The question has always been, why? So a quick search online as to if this is a requirement and why it would be this way reveals that the founder of this restaurant experienced that same kind of response, that same kind of customer service when he visited a Ritz-Carlton, one of the highest hotel chains there is. He said he experienced the staff at that hotel as being so genuinely interested in the care of the customers. He wanted his customers, his own customers, despite it being fast food, to experience that same kind of hospitality. He said the response of "my pleasure" means more than just your standard, "You're welcome"? I don't know. Maybe it does. I guess "my pleasure" shows a little more intentionality with how you would express gratitude. It catches you off guard when you hear something like that when you're ordering a chicken sandwich. It makes people stop and think and then obviously talk about this kind of graciousness that there is. I mean, there were a ton of articles online that were all titled, "Why do Chick-fil-A employees say 'my pleasure'?" It's a hot topic. But it's a way to acknowledge gratitude. So as we know, Jesus was very intentional about recognizing and acknowledging gratitude. We especially see that in the gospel story we get this evening. 10 lepers, the people with a terrible skin disease, not the animals. 10 lepers approach Jesus, though keeping their distance, and they call out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And just like that, Jesus sees them. He recognizes them. He recognizes their situation and their request. And we hear, he responds, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." That's all he says. And with that, Luke tells us that those 10 lepers left and went to see the priests. And while they were on their way, they were made clean. We could get down into the weeds of trying to determine just how they were made clean. Did Jesus send them on their way and while their backs were turned, he shot his magical healing powers at them and they were made clean while their backs were turned? Or did their obedience and listening to Jesus, did that take care of the cleansing? Or did it have to do with them going to see the priests? Or was it something that Jesus saw was already going to happen and he sent them to be recognized by the religious authorities, the ones who would tell them whether or not they were clean? Well, we don't know. I think what is important for us tonight isn't necessarily how it happened, as much as the fact that it did happen. We can leave those details for another day and just say that 10 lepers who asked Jesus for mercy were cleansed. They were made clean. They were healed of their disease and no longer considered ritually and religiously unclean and untouchable. And so while they were on their way to see the priests, Luke tells us that one of those 10 saw that he was healed. He recognized that something was different, and that caused him to turn around and show Jesus gratitude. He praises God with a loud voice. He prostrates himself, gets down on the ground at Jesus' feet, and thanks him. Only one out of all the 10 lepers who were healed recognized that this happened and returned to offer their gratitude. So Jesus, notices that. He says, "Were not 10 made clean? The other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" I hope you also noticed that part in the reading where Luke clarified that the one who returned was a Samaritan. Samaritans had only really been mentioned twice so far in Luke's gospel. Once to say that Jesus was not received by a Samaritan village because Samaritans and Jews didn't get along. But even when Jesus' disciples wanted to leave a wrath with that village that didn't welcome them, Jesus rebukes those disciples and just doesn't allow it, and they simply depart. And then not long after that happened, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a Samaritan, an outsider, an enemy, someone who had just turned Jesus away, was hailed as the hero. And then here again, the Samaritan, the outsider, the enemy, the Samaritan is the only one to recognize what happened and return and show gratitude for being cleansed and healed. So Jesus addresses this one. He says, "Get up, go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Now, this is where I got even more curious, because while I know I said we didn't need to figure out all the details about how the 10 lepers were cleansed, this statement by Jesus indicates something else, something more has happened. Your faith has made you well. That's different from what Luke told us happened to all 10 lepers, how they were made clean. It's a completely different word that Luke said that Jesus told the Samaritan. All 10 were made clean. This one was made well. He was saved and rescued. The word that Jesus used means that he was made whole. Gratitude can do that. Recognizing those things around us that God has done for us, that can bring gratitude and wholeness. Intentionally stopping in your tracks, turning around and offering God praise and thanksgiving, that can change us. It's that difference between a casual and possibly thoughtless, "You're welcome," versus that very intentional and attention-grabbing, "My pleasure." Now again, this is not to say that dialogue of "thank you" and "you're welcome" does not mean anything anymore. No, those words still cause us to recognize that something good is happening around us. But in a place in where we are, in a place of basically overabundance, I think we sometimes lose sight of what can make for a whole and truly abundant life. Maybe you've heard this news, but Black Friday is right around the corner. I mean, I feel like that's all we've been hearing recently. There's no better time for us to be reminded that we don't have enough stuff, and everyone else is depending on us to get them the stuff we need, and we can give you that stuff. But thinking of all that going on around us, all that stuff makes us start to forget about how we can be grateful and how we're supposed to be grateful. Moses, in that earlier reading from Deuteronomy, and Paul in that reading from 2 Corinthians, both of them remind us about the correlation between this abundant life and how it's connected to a life in faithful relationship to God. God is the source and the one who provides the things that we need for true abundance and wholeness. And because of that promise from God, we can sow and share and give back to those who are poor and hungry, suffering and forgotten. Our thanksgiving, our gratitude overflows into generosity. Our thanksgiving and gratitude makes us one with our neighbors all around the world and serves to bring about healing and wholeness. And so it is good for us to get together and take this opportunity to pause and give thanks to God for all of the blessings and abundance around us, for all the seeds that have been sown, for the bounty of the harvest that comes forth from the earth and from our lives. And I can just imagine God responding to our words of thankfulness and gratitude by looking down and saying, "It's my pleasure." Amen.